Good evening. Welcome to the debate between Revere City Councilor at Large, Jessica Giannino, and Joe Gravelisi for the Democratic nomination of the 16th Suffolk District seat that encompasses parts of Revere, Chelsea, and Saugus. This debate is being brought to you by Revere TV and the Revere Journal. I am Stephen Quigley, President of the Revere Journal, and I will be acting as moderator for the debate. Timekeeper will be Carrie Schumann, editor of the Revere Journal. In these difficult times, for everyone's safety, both candidates are not wearing masks during the debate, but are more than 6 feet apart with a plexi shield divider between them. As a moderator, I am not wearing a mask, but I am more than 12 feet apart. All of the people in the studio are wearing a mask. Now for the format of the debate. Each candidate will be giving an opening statement. A coin toss was held prior and determined who would start first. Candidates will be allowed up to 3 minutes each. The next phase of the debate will be 6 questions on the following topics: state taxes, police, climate, opioid legislation, local aid, gun control. The first question will be asked to the candidate who won the coin toss to respond, and the other candidate will be given the opportunity to also respond. The next 5 questions will then be alternating between the candidates. Candidates are allotted 2 minutes each to answer the questions. The next phase of the debate is that candidates can ask each other 2 questions of their choice, with a rebuttal given to the candidate who first asked the question. There will be up to 3 minutes to respond. A coin toss determines the order. The final part of the debate will be closing statements for each candidate, lasting up to 3 minutes. Again, a coin toss decided who would go first. So, going to the first part of the debate. City Councilor Jessica Giannino won the coin toss and will give the opening statement.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Good evening, 16th Suffolk District. My name is Jessica Giannino, and I am a candidate for state representative. I want to first thank the Revere Journal and the Revere TV for hosting this debate this evening. We found out just before we started that this is the first live show out of the new building, so congrats, Bob and the team. As a Revere City Councilor serving in my 5th term, I am well versed on the issues of our district. I'm proud of my record of accomplishments on behalf of my constituents, and I'm deeply grateful for the overwhelming support my campaign has received by so many of you. These past few months have been as exciting as they've been difficult, and each of us has been faced with situations that have tried our patience and challenged our limits. We've also been moved by the extraordinary examples of those who so willingly put others before themselves. Teachers scrambling to find new systems and learn them overnight to ensure that they can inspire children remotely. Medical professionals and first responders risking their lives to take care of those who are at risk. This has truly been amazing to witness. On the campaign front, it's a strange new world. As we prepare for what the future has in store for us, one thing that has not and will not change is this. Rather than tell you how you should feel about issues, I ask how you feel about them. That is the difference between my opponent and I. I am a realist who is very aware that the hard-working men and women of the 16th Suffolk District are underpaid, overtaxed, and stretched to their limits. I stand here tonight with 5 terms of leadership behind me and a long list of the results that I have delivered for those I represent. My sleeves have been rolled up, working, delivering actual results to people in our district. I'm a founding member of the Alliance for the Health and Environment, an organization that has been the leader in the fight against district's corporate enemy number 1, Wheelabrator. And I've worked hand in hand with Councilwoman McKenna on a plastic bag ban that has made our streets and our beach cleaner. I've stood shoulder to shoulder to support fair wages and better treatment of workers and bring jobs to this district. If I'm fortunate enough to be elected to serve as your state representative for the 16th Suffolk District, my door will always be open, your opinion will always matter, and I will never stop fighting for you. Thank you.
Joe will give his opening remarks.
Thank you, everyone. Hi, I'm Joe Gravelisi, and I'm running for state representative because even before COVID hit, we knew that communities like ours needed better from our state government. We deserve better on education so that there's not a huge gap between the resources available for a kid born in Wellesley or Belmont versus a kid born in Revere or Chelsea. so that every 3 or 4-year-old has access to universal pre-K, so that all kids show up to school ready to go. And that we eliminate the 2,000 plus student waiting list for seats in vocational and technical schools. We deserve better on protecting the rights of working people, so that we crack down on wage theft and unfair labor practices and extend emergency paid sick time to people on the front lines of this pandemic. We deserve better on environmental protection. For years, we've known about the potential for wind and solar energy to unlock high-quality jobs for our residents and improve public health in Massachusetts by reducing pollution. But while we used to lead the nation in this front, now 9 states have passed us in terms of renewable energy, while we've fallen behind. We deserve better on transportation, where in 2009, the legislature was warned that a ticking time bomb was on their hands, that the T was falling apart and it needed dramatic repairs. They did nothing with this information. The ticking time bomb went off, and we dealt with the commute Armageddon that we faced before COVID, without keeping our transportation system up with the times. We deserve better to make sure that people of all ages, from seniors on fixed incomes to people my age that are just starting out, to the 900 plus homeless veterans around the state, don't get priced out of Greater Boston by the escalating cost of housing. We deserve better than seeing the cost of prescription drugs go up every year like insulin without assertive state action. We knew about all these challenges and we knew about all these issues before the pandemic happened. And then COVID hit, and it really laid so many of these challenges bare in our communities. And I've been there on the front lines distributing food and supplies to people struggling during this economic crisis. I've seen their challenges, I've felt their pain, and I've seen how many of our residents were just one disaster away from having to line up for food to be able to feed their families, or from seeing their dreams of buying a home or sending their kids to college be erased. I've seen how this pandemic has disproportionately impacted communities like ours, and I understand from my extensive experience working in state and local government how these different issues that we talked about are interconnected and led to COVID hitting our communities so hard. I have great respect for Councilor Giannino, and I have great respect for her family, including Representative Vincent, and I think they've all served our community admirably. But I ran for office because we need a bolder approach than has been offered previously and a bolder approach than is being offered right now to not return to the pre-COVID status quo. I ran to fight for these structural changes that we need to help families and communities like ours be able to build a future here. And I'm asking for your vote on September 1st to help us do just that. Thank you.
Okay, we move to the next phase of the debate, which will be 6 questions asked to the candidates. Joe won the coin toss on this, and I will ask him the first question, and then I'll ask the same question to Jessica. Okay. First question. If the federal government does not provide pandemic financial assistance to the states, Massachusetts will be facing a serious budget deficit in the coming fiscal year. How do you believe the state should close this budget gap? Do you favor an increase in the gas tax or any other taxes to do so? And you have 2 minutes to give an answer.
Thank you for that question. It's an important question because odds are, unfortunately, the federal government is probably not going to send the resources that we need with the current state of the federal government. A lot of people are surprised to learn this, but since the late 90s, the state has actually cut taxes by over $4 billion per year, with the vast majority of that benefit going to the people at the very top. Now, if you're an ordinary working class person at home, you probably are thinking there's no way that my taxes got cut. You certainly don't feel like your taxes got cut. And there's a reason for that. A couple $100s of an income tax cut doesn't really do you much good, and you don't really feel it when the cost of housing keeps going up, the cost of healthcare keeps going up, the cost to send your kids to school keeps going up. So you might not feel it, but I can promise you that if you live in a multi-million-dollar home in Belmont or Lexington, you probably notice tens of thousands of dollars a year worth in cuts to your taxes. So we need to reverse this trend because our unwillingness to invest in the things that we all need, like infrastructure and education and healthcare, really led to the challenges that we see now. So we can do more to make sure the state has the revenue we need. Obviously there's the proposed tax on income of over $1 million, which I do support. But also, we have the option to adopt a tax on corporations that shift profit overseas, and we have not done that as a state. Christine Barber, a friend of mine, a state representative from Somerville, has filed a bill to fix that, and I support it. We can address the gap between income that you earn at work and passive income like capital gains and dividend taxes, which we've cut here in Massachusetts. And we can address the fact that the way our corporate tax code is structured means that Amazon pays the same corporate minimum tax rate as a small business. So we can fix these things. We also give out over $1 billion a year in tax breaks without really properly studying what benefits we're deriving from them. So these are all things that I think we can and really must fix so that we can continue to fund things like education, like transportation, and like healthcare coming out of this pandemic. Thank you.
Jess, do you need me to reread the question?
Sure.
Okay. If the federal government does not provide pandemic financial assistance to these states, Massachusetts will be facing a serious budget deficit in the coming fiscal year. How do you believe the state should close this budget gap? Do you favor an increase in the gas tax or any other taxes to do so?
Thank you. So I think it's first and foremost what we need to do is really stop the bleeding while also committing to protect working families. Public funding is in a state of disarray. We're looking at a $3 to $6 billion deficit just in Massachusetts, and experts are saying that it's probably going to be right around $4 billion. And as someone who just voted on a budget, I can assure you that this is the worst economic situation that this country's been in since the Great Depression. Revere, Saugus, and Chelsea are primarily high volume and commuter cut-through communities. And I'm not going to allow anyone to continue to cut through the savings and the wallets of the hardworking people of this community. I can tell you that when voting on the budget, we had to plan ahead because we, quite frankly, don't know what the budget for the state is going to hold. We're not going to know until the fall. So I think it's important that we do support taxes like the millionaire's tax, which my opponent and I both agree on, as well as other creative ways to bring funding into the community. I don't think taxing our residents is the right option, and I also don't think that really large corporations should share the same tax breaks that small mom and pop shops have. Growing up in a family business, I can tell you right now that a lot of family businesses are struggling. A lot of businesses owned by women and people of color are not going to recover from this crisis. So I think it's really, really important that we get creative and that we tax the people that can afford it and not the people in the 16th Suffolk District who already pay enough.
Okay. Next question, and this is addressed to Jessica. What is your view of the movement to defund police departments?
Thank you, Stephen. So as you all know, this is an issue that hits really close to home for me. As many of you know, my dad is a police officer. He's a sergeant on the Revere Police Department, and he loves the people of Revere as much as they love him. And I'd like to think that all police officers were like my dad, but unfortunately I know that's not the case. And the calls to reform the way police officers are recruited and trained is long overdue. The House bill addressed the immediate concerns we all share. And aside from the pandemic, there has not been a more glaring issue than police reform and public safety. We don't know what the final reform bill will look like. It's still in conference committee. So to make comments right now to say whether you're for or against it is very premature because we don't know what the outcome and what the formal literature will be. I read a quote that sums it up. And it says that qualified immunity balances two important interests: the need to hold public officials accountable when they exercise power irresponsibly, and the need to shield officials from harassment, distraction, and liability when they perform their duties reasonably. Eliminating long-standing protection of good cops just because there are bad cops is bad policy. And I'd like to watch and see how this plays out over the next few months. Obviously it's something that's near and dear to my heart, but I have the support of many police and fire unions, so first responders are at the top of my list of priorities, and I will continue to keep fighting for them and ensure that they are protected. Thank you.
Do you need me to repeat the question, Joe?
Sure. So just to start off with the sort of phrasing of the question itself, I don't think there's really any serious figure in Massachusetts that's calling on defunding the police. You hear that in activist circles, and there's all different debates about what that means, but that's certainly not something that you're hearing as a serious proposal at the state level. So moving beyond that and addressing the police reform bill as the councilor did, first of all, I don't think that you have to sit back and wait for what the conference committee does to say how you would have voted up or down on the bill that was before the House. In fact, I think it's irresponsible not to do so. This is one of the most important bills that the House voted on this year, and if you are in that seat and you have to make that vote, then you have to make a tough choice, and you have to face the consequences of the fact that some people are not going to like your vote. I would have voted yes on the police reform bill, just as Rep. Vincent did. I think there are a lot of things in there that were really common sense. For instance, the certification and decertification process for officers, so that if an officer gets fired from, the Holyoke Police Department, that they don't resurface at the Springfield Police Department or the Chelsea Police Department. It also means looking at training and recruitment practices, which is something that's been done fairly successfully in the city of Revere, where we've seen a shift towards community-oriented policing, more, neighborhood patrols, neighborhood substations, and less of a sort of militarized focus on policing. And I think that some of those efforts have shown that it's really this fiction to try to present it as being a dichotomy between either being for reform or for police. I don't think that being for reform, and I think the counselor and I basically agree on this, that just because you want to see important reforms doesn't mean that you're against police. I do know that police unions are opposed to the House bill. I would have voted for it. I applaud the fact that Rev. Vincent voted for it. I know it's controversial, and you might agree or disagree with my stance, but I do have strong working relationships, with Chief Callahan here in Revere and other officials. And even if we disagree on this one, I'm sure we can find ways to work together. But I do think we owe it to the residents to say how we would have voted on that bill, since it is probably the most important bill the House voted on this year. Thank you.
The next question, I'll address to Joe. It's on climate. Climate change is an issue of particular importance to our residents because of rising sea levels. Do you believe our state government leaders are doing enough to address this issue? And if not, what additional measures should our state take to avoid potentially catastrophic consequences for our coastline?
Yeah, no, not at all. And, the House and Senate both just recently passed climate bills that really fall woefully short of what we need to do. It's important to realize that the climate crisis and the environment in general, it's not a future problem, it is today's problem. There's a clear and obvious link between communities that have high rates of pollution and high rates of things like asthma and cancer, and we've always known that. And now we're also seeing that link between pollution and COVID-19. We're also seeing immediate impacts of the climate crisis now through coastal flooding, through your flood insurance rates going up, through historic storms. So we really need to move with urgency on climate issues, and we have not done that yet. So in terms of some steps that we can take, we do need to commit to 100% clean renewable energy and no expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure, and not taking any money from the fossil fuel industry. And I'm the only candidate in this race that's committed to all of those things. Right now in Massachusetts, our renewable energy portfolio standard, which is what percentage of clean energy we're using, we're only set to get to 100% by 2090. That's woefully inadequate. We need to lift the cap on solar net metering to encourage more community solar projects and encourage more solar energy to come on board. We need to remove the permitting hurdles that are getting in the way of us being a leader in wind energy. Offshore wind in Massachusetts could be a huge industry that generates a lot of revenue for the state and makes our air cleaner, but we haven't moved quickly enough to do that. We need to transform our public transportation system so that more people use it and we can reduce emissions from the transportation sector. And we need to increase funding on environmental enforcement. For years, environmental advocates have been pleading with the legislature to dedicate at least 1% of the state budget to the environmental protection. And every year we don't do it. And we've seen the consequences of a decline in inspections of environmental hazards, whether it be landfills or whether it be power plants or others. So we need to reverse this trend of underfunding environmental protection, and we need to take stronger action soon on climate issues in general. Thank you.
Yes, would you like me to repeat the question? Okay. Climate change is an issue of particular importance to our residents because of rising sea levels. Do you believe our state government leaders are doing enough to address the issue? And if not, what additional measures should our state take to avoid potentially catastrophic consequences for our coastline?
Thank you. So I want to start by saying I think that the state has been doing a good job, but I think we can always do more. I know Rep. Vincent has been an incredible ally for us in terms of protecting the environment, and we're also so lucky to be represented by the Speaker for a portion of Revere Beach and to have his help with really advocating for our beach. So I'm very grateful for that. But when I got elected in 2012, I never thought I would see the number of natural disasters that we've had in the city of Revere. And I believe it was 2015, we had that record snowstorm where we had feet of snow that I can remember was piled up to telephone poles. We had a tornado. These 100-year storms and these once in a lifetime events are now happening almost every other year. So we have to attribute that to climate change, and we have to notice that something else is going on. I've walked down the Point of Pines and I've waded in the water when it floods down there, and let me tell you, it is scary. We're directly affected in the city of Revere by erosion of our shorelines and by sea level rise. we're lucky to be able to work with the Army Corps of Engineers in terms of working on seawalls and different things that we can do to protect our residents. But, the climate and the environment's always been something that's really important to me and something that I've been passionate about. And I've been an outspoken leader against one of the district's biggest violators, and that's Wheelabrator. I work to ban plastic bags, and I'm also, working on many other issues that impact the district. So I've testified at DEP hearings. I've held Wheelabrator accountable when they can go to more affluent towns and buy credits to pass emissions tests. Our residents are worth more than that. They shouldn't be able to pollute our air and our water and buy their way out of it. And I think there are other things in the district that we need to look at. We need to look at the salt piles in Chelsea. We need to look at the Mystic Power Plant. We need to look at the pollution from the Tobin Bridge. Our communities should not be impacted any differently than Marblehead, than Swampscott, and then Nahant by these environmental polluters, and I'll continue to fight against them.
Thank you. Okay, this question will be addressed to Jessica. It's on drug use. So opioid addiction remains a persistent problem in our city, state, and nation, killing 70,000 Americans every year. What should we do about this problem? Do you think the time has come to decriminalize these drugs and provide safe injection sites for addicts, similar to what is done in some European countries where deaths from heroin and other opioids are non-existent?
So thank you for asking that. So I want to start by saying, no, I don't agree with that at all. I think that we need to start at the bottom and work our way up. And I think that that approach would be starting at the top and trying to fix an issue that's already there. So first of all, when you look at the city of Revere, we have an amazing SUDI program, one that the rest of the state looks at for guidance because we're doing so well. But when you think about the opioid pandemic, I think we need to think of it like a pyramid. So your overdoses and the issues you see are the top of the pyramid, but what we're not talking about and we're not focusing in is the foundation of the pyramid. And what that is that's mental health. And there is a direct correlation between mental health and alcohol and opioid abuse. And I think that the solution to this really starts at a young age. It's education. It's when Johnny's in the second grade in school and someone takes his toy, it's teaching him coping skills to get through these things so that when Johnny goes to high school and his girlfriend breaks up with him, he doesn't turn to drugs and alcohol. And when he is 25 and gets out of the army, doesn't turn to drug and substance abuse. We need to teach our children coping mechanisms and identify mental health awareness issues early on and be proactive about them. I don't think that the solution in this is giving people a safe place. I think the solution in this is education and continuing to give resources like our city already does. And I'm really proud of the work my community's done. Thank you.
Joe, do you need me to repeat the question?
No, thank you. So, look, I'm hard on Massachusetts sometimes, and I point out when I think that we've fallen short. But I think one thing that the legislature and the governor have done a really good job on in recent years is passing opioid-related legislation. Most recently in 2018, it was a bipartisan effort. It expanded access to recovery coaches, to addiction treatment services, and it provided more resources to cities and towns to do the kind of work that we're doing in Revere. This is a personal issue for me. When I was going around campaigning, with Mayor Arrigo back in 2015, we were really in the middle of the peak of the opioid crisis. I saw friends die, classmates, relatives of friends, and really all over the community we knew that we had to do something. And the day after the mayor's victory was confirmed and I had my first sort of transition meeting, it was in the basement of City Hall with the public health, the people that work in public health and healthy community initiatives. And it was, how can we take the sort of scattershot work that's being done on the addiction crisis now and make it something that really works well for the residents? And that's where the plan was hatched for the Substance Use Disorder Initiatives Office, which brought that work under one umbrella, which put city staff working on this full time. It gave place to people to drop in and get resources and be connected to addiction recovery services and to treatment options. It also really built upon what was already a successful outreach program, which had public safety officials and public health workers go to the homes of people that suffered from an overdose and talk to them about what their options were for treatment and recovery. So at the state level, we need to take that model, take that blueprint and expand it, because it is something that's based in the evidence. This stuff works. And injection sites can work too. There is a lot of evidence that shows that they can. This public health work is critical and it needs to be funded. We planted the seeds in my years working in the mayor's office to have full-time health and human services department overseen by qualified public health professionals. And Councilor Giannino in the budget this year voted against funding that position. That's going to have long-term consequences for us if we're not able to find the funding to have someone overseeing this public health work, including substance use disorder initiatives. So this is something that I'll continue to fight for, certainly.
Okay. The next question, and Joe, it's addressed to you and then to Jess. Okay. Do you believe the state's local aid formula is fair to the communities in the 16th district? And if not, specifically, how would you change it?
Sure. So there's a couple areas of local aid that that we want to talk about. So there's the sort of general unrestricted local aid, and I do think that the formula, generally speaking, is pretty fair. You haven't seen a huge movement to change that. There's aid to schools through Chapter 70 funding, which generally speaking we have found that to be pretty unfair, and there was a long-term movement to change that and implement the Student Opportunity Act, which passed last year. Unfortunately, the Student Opportunity Act only phases in over 7 years to bring communities like Revere and other gateway cities to where we need to be to have the funding that we need for our schools. So I wish we had moved more quickly on that, but it is at least a start, and I think that was a good bill. And then there's also the state budget process, where earmarks are handed out for certain projects. In terms of making sure that we're fighting to increase the local aid and get the local aid that we need in our communities, this really goes back to what I talked about earlier about our priorities. We've made it a priority to continue giving out tax breaks to people making over $1 million a year, to continue giving out corporate tax breaks, to continue having a low rate on dividends and capital gains taxes. And as long as we continue to make those choices with our budget, we're not going to have the funding that we need to really invest in the things our cities and towns need, to invest in public works, to invest in education, in our water and sewer infrastructure, and public health programs. So we really need to change our priorities in terms of state budgeting. That's really the pool that we get really matters a lot, in terms of what we're able to put into our cities and towns. So as far as aid to schools, we do need to keep our eye on the Student Opportunity Act. That's something that there's a real risk that all those years of work that went into that are going to be kneecapped by the budget crisis that we're going through right now. And again, it really speaks to the need to raise revenue. Thank you.
Jess, do you need me to repeat? Okay. Do you believe the state's local aid formula is fair to the communities in the 16th district? And if not, specifically, how would you change it?
Thank you. So yes, I do believe it's fair, but I think that the 16th Suffolk district deserves more than just its fair share. I think that our residents are plagued with cut-through traffic, and they're plagued with so many other issues that are consequences of other communities that it's about time we get more, and we need more, so it's important that we fight for more. People in this district don't know where their next paycheck is coming from. We need to be realistic when we budget and make proposals, just like I've been on the council. I voted no on raises, not new positions, but raises, because I knew that money, those hundreds of thousands of dollars in raises, while Revere had over 25% unemployment rate, sent the totally wrong message about our priorities in the city. And that vote may have cost me an endorsement politically, but I'll always do what's right for my constituents. The FY21 budget, we hope we know what it looks like, but we don't. And you know what? It's going to be delayed until the fall. So I think that we need to be prudent in our planning and make sure that we don't have to dig out of a rainy day fund, and we don't have to take money to balance a budget. So I think that the City of Revere did a good job, balancing and passing a prudent budget. But what we need to do is look creatively at finding revenue sources that doesn't dig into the pockets of the people of the district. We need to strengthen our lottery. Treasurer Goldberg, mentioned that an option was online. So how do we get the lottery online? How do we look at options like that? The lottery provides so much funding that goes directly into our school systems, that goes directly into our cities and towns. So I think that we need to get creative, we need to find more ways for funding, and we need to continue to fight to say, you know what, no, we don't just want our fair share, we want more. We put up with more, and our residents deserve more. Thank you.
We're going to the last question in this format, and Jessica, you're going to answer it first. Okay, it's on gun control. Although Massachusetts has a very low rate of deaths by guns, thanks to our strong gun laws, do you believe that there are any other gun control laws that the state should pass to strengthen our existing statutes?
Thank you. So I really think the state of Massachusetts has some of the strictest laws in the country, and I think that every state should model what the state of Massachusetts does. If I were on the legislature when the red flag bill was passed, I would have supported Marjorie Decker. And what the red flag bill does is it takes people who are at extreme risk of protection, or an ERPO, and it allows family members and law enforcement to petition the courts to separate firearms from an individual who is found to pose harm to themselves or to others. And that was signed into law in 2018. So the state has always been very progressive and very forward-thinking in terms of protection and regulating gun laws. So I think that other states need to model what we do, but this is an area where the state's really doing something right, and there are strong women in the legislature that are pushing these amendments and pushing these bills and making it that way.
Okay. Well, that concludes these.
Well, I do have
I'm sorry. I'm sorry,
I
Joe.
will say,
I'm sorry. Do you need me to repeat the question?
no, actually, I pretty much completely agree with what the counselor said. I think Massachusetts has shown that it's possible to respect the Second Amendment, individual right to gun ownership, but also have really sensible gun laws that allow us to have one of the lowest gun death rates in the country. You mentioned the stats. It was 3.4 per 100,000 people in 2016. That's less. Almost the national average is almost 4 times higher than that. So. I've called out areas where I feel like we haven't done enough in Massachusetts, on education, on transportation, on climate, but gun control is an area that I think that we've done a good job on. And so, continuing to stay the course and fight back against efforts by the gun lobby to try to roll back the things that we do well, I think that really should be our priority in terms of gun legislation.
Okay, now that ends that part of the debate. Sorry about that. Okay, so now we come to the part where the candidates will ask each other 2 questions. You can have up to 3 minutes each to respond. And Jessica won the coin toss, so she gets to ask Joseph the first question.
And to clarify, are we doing 1, 2, 1, 2?
You're going to go, you'll ask a question,
Gotcha.
Joe will reply, then you can rebut, then Joe will ask you a question.
Perfect. All right. Question number 1. 10 years ago, when I was a sophomore at Salem State University, I was lobbying for public higher education. 5 years ago on the City Council, I worked on countless ordinances with my colleagues in government on things such as the residential parking ordinance, the commercial vehicle parking ordinance, both of which cleaned up our streets, the ban on plastic bags, initiatives to keep our parks safe, and bonding for federal consent decrees to fix decades of neglect on our water and sewer lines, just to name a few things. Joe, in your 2 years of experience in working for the city, can you name a project that you spearheaded and ushered through every step and saw it to completion?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'll answer about the city, but then I'll also pivot to talk about, my extensive experience at both the state and local level. So in my time working in the mayor's office, the projects that were really my project that we brought from beginning to end, first of all, the Substance Use Disorder Initiatives Office. I was in the first meeting for that. I was the person that was really overseeing the process of getting the funding secured for that, really pushing the mayor to get it done. Straight on through to the ribbon cutting, which, as is my style, I wasn't the person cutting the ribbon. I was behind the scenes, working with the people that were actually the ones that had their faces in front of the camera, but that was a project that I was really proud to work on. I was also responsible for reviving the city's Commission on Disabilities. It had been dormant for about 10 years. A number of the members had passed away or moved out of the city and just hadn't met to do anything. So I sat down with the mayor, I hatched a plan to bring it back. We put a really qualified person in charge of it and started a project to do ADA compliance in all city buildings, to expand programming for youth with disabilities, such as bringing Special Olympics back to Revere. And then I was also instrumental in creating the 311 constituent services system. So in the first year that I worked in the office, we didn't have the 311 system yet. We were starting to study how to do it. And my work with the existing C-Click Fix system, we use that to create an analysis of what are the different things that we need to prepare for when the 311 system comes online. And then I helped to train the 311 staff that came on board for that project. So these are things that I'm really proud of, but then beyond that, I've also worked at the state level. I worked on getting legislation passed that cracked down on Eversource and National Grid and held them responsible for gas leaks. That created a transparent mapping program so that people all over the state can see where the gas leaks are and put in a strict timeline for how quickly gas leaks need to be repaired once they reach a certain level of dangerousness. So I sat across from lobbyists, I sat across from other legislators and legislative staff. I gave briefings on what this bill looks like and what we need to do. Really proud of my work on that. I also helped bring into place a law that cracks down on non-compete agreements, which which employers often use to abuse low-wage workers. We heard about examples of Jimmy John's, a sandwich shop, would make their employees sign a non-compete agreement so that they can't go work at a Subway or another sandwich shop. I helped write that bill. I helped get it passed. I sat down with people in the tech industry, people in the venture capital industry, people representing labor and low-wage workers, and helped put together a bill that was able to get passed and signed into law that cracked down on some of those abuses. So, and then beyond that, I've also worked to organize and get really good candidates elected during my career as an organizer and my time working on the Democratic City Committee to make real strong progressive change here in the community. So I'm very proud of my record of accomplishment, as I'm sure you are as well. Thank you.
Or add any more to?
No, I mean, he answered the question, and I think you've done a great job working for your bosses in Mayor Rico and getting some of their jobs accomplished.
Okay. So now we'll go on to Joe. You have a question for?
Yeah, sure. So, we both have great respect for Representative Vincent and appreciate her public service, but we are both running to sort of represent a new generation. So, Councillor, what would you say are a few policy areas that are differences between yourself and Rosalie Vincent?
That's a great question, Joe. Well, one area that we can talk about right now is the issue of defunding the police. That's something that I spoke about earlier, that I said that I would not support that. So I think that that's very clear. Other than that, I think that we have some different views. I think that I'm a little bit more progressive in terms of some of my views on women's health rights. I'm very pro-choice, and I've been outspoken about a woman's right to choose and a woman's right to her own body. And I think that other than that, we share many similar views in terms of environmental concerns. And I really am proud to, have worked with her on some of the issues and advocate for the citizens of Revere and Saugus, and also really, fight for them and to stand up at DEP hearings and to tell them that we're not going to take it. And, she's done a wonderful job representing our community, and I think that we share a lot of similarities. But I think as a younger woman that's, just getting into the state level politics, I think that I have some different opinions on some things, and those would be two big ones.
Sure. I appreciate that answer, and I agree about a lot of the positive things that Rep. Vincent has done, although I don't believe that Rep. Vincent supports defunding the police, nor did she ever vote to do so, so I'm not sure how that's a difference. But I appreciate your comments about supporting the Roe Act and supporting women's right to choose, because I know that's something that I appreciate that you support, and I do as well. So I think that's something that we have in common there. And I think that really it's important to demonstrate what are some of the differences. And I've tried to lay out over the course of my time, not only tonight, but also over the course of this campaign, about my sort of different vision for what I want to do with this seat. And really fight for bigger, bolder policy ideas around education, around transportation, around healthcare. All things that some may say are not realistic, but I think what's really not realistic is returning to our pre-COVID status quo, where we had such staggering inequality, where our cities and towns faced such challenges, and where we were falling behind so many other states on these areas. Thank you.
Okay. Jessica, your second question to Joe?
Thank you. So, Joe, we've agreed on the millionaire's tax. We have similar views on public safety, that Black Lives Matter, on transportation, on rent control, and the environment. But what we don't agree on, Joe, is that when unemployment's over 25%, what priorities are most important? You've presented many lofty ideas and proposals while I've been voting on budget cuts. Your employer, where you hold a senior fundraising position, Boston College, is currently the 4th largest endowment in the state. Democratic nominee for governor in 2018, Jay Gonzalez, proposed taxing endowments instead of allowing colleges and universities to continue payments in lieu of taxes. This means that rather than paying for taxes, private schools and universities can basically choose where their money goes. So private schools like Harvard, MIT, and BC continue to pay pennies to the dollar of what they would have to pay in taxes, also while gobbling up more taxable land and putting further strain on businesses and homeowners alike. Joe, would you commit the lead to sponsor legislation that will tax university endowments and that would raise over $1 billion annually while not impacting working families or businesses at all? And would you join me in supporting this type of legislation? That way, maybe we can pay for some of your proposals.
Sure. So I think what I would prefer to do instead is I think that large nonprofits like universities should just pay property taxes like everyone else. I've long supported that. I don't necessarily think that taxing endowments is necessarily the right idea. First of all, it would bring in such a small amount of revenue. But I do think that making universities pay taxes, making some of these large nonprofit institutions, they should just pay taxes like everyone else. That's my opinion. I don't like this pilot stuff. I don't like the cities of Boston and Cambridge saying that we're going to create a formula and we're going to ask you to pay this, but it's voluntary, but this is what we want you to do. I think they should just pay taxes. I've long felt that way. I know that that's probably unpopular, not only with my employer, but with a lot of nonprofits around the state. But I think everyone should pay the same property taxes as everyone else, especially when you reach a certain threshold. So I appreciate that question because I do think that that's one of the biggest challenges that in the Boston area we face is that so many of our large landowners are nonprofits. Not so much in Revere, but in Chelsea there's a lot of nonprofits. And I do think that when you reach a certain size and certain income level, that having to pay property taxes is reasonable.
Jess, do you want to respond or add anything?
Sure. Well, Joe, I'm really happy to hear that you would support property taxes. I think that's wonderful. But I don't think $1 billion is a small chunk of change. And when you look at the endowments of some of the colleges and universities like MIT and Harvard and BC and BU that are in, the greater Boston area, we're so lucky that we have some of the best, educational facilities in the country. As a student that, went all through public schools and went through public higher ed and lobbied for public higher ed. I think that's great, but I think that they do need to pay more. And when they're getting billions of dollars in endowments, I think that some of that money should go towards the communities that they're in. But thank you.
Okay. Joe, your second question to
Sure.
Jessica.
So I just want to follow up a little bit and talk more about climate because we discussed that a little bit earlier, but you didn't really offer steps that you would support to address climate change. I know that that you care a lot about Wheelabrator, which is an important issue and something that we need to do more about, but it's not really part of the climate issue. So what are the specific steps that you support around climate change? And then how did you feel about the House and Senate bills that just passed? Which one did you prefer? And what do you think are the next steps that we should take on climate?
Great. Well, thank you. I think that's a great question, Joe. And I think that, there's a lot happening in the House right now, but unfortunately, none of those bills are going to be relevant when either you or I are up there. I think that some important things we need to look at climate change are holding big companies accountable. I think that companies like Wheelabrator and like the Mystic Power Plant just get away with far too much. I think that we need to really hold the DEP's feet to the fire, and I think that we need to be more proactive with making sure that they hold those private companies accountable. It's not fair that communities out in Western Mass, like Lexington and Concord and these beautiful affluent communities, their trash gets dumped here and we're dealing with it. When you think about it, it really is surreal that we're filling a marsh that's an area of critical environmental concern, a facility that should have closed 20 years ago, and we're pushing it out, and we're allowing them to buy credits. So one of the first things I don't agree with is the ability for a facility to be able to buy its way out of holding itself accountable for emissions that are affecting our residents. That's why we have higher cancer rates here. That's why we have higher asthma rates here. That's a direct correlation to the issues we have in this community. And I think that, those are great things that we can do, but I think that we need to do more than just, talk about the environment and, we can do everything we want to save the polar bears and the polar ice caps, but the reality of it is I'm grounded in this district. I'm focused on Wheelabrator. I'm focused on the salt piles. I'm focused on the Mystic Power Plant, and I'm focused on legislation that would, really hold those private companies accountable and not allow them to buy their way out of situations. Thank you.
Joe?
Sure. Well, I agree with a lot of what you said, but you didn't answer the question. The question was about what steps you would take to deal with climate change, and that's not about the polar bears. That is about our community. We're a coastal community that's going to experience the impact of flooding. We already are, and we're going to continue to do so moving forward. And then all of these emissions that are coming from polluting facilities, as you so aptly put, do impact our public health. As far as, it's irrelevant to comment on bills before the House right now, I disagree with that. That was your answer to the policing bill. It's your answer to the climate bills. I think that it's reasonable for people that are voting to know how you would have voted on important bills that are before the House right now. I think that's a good way of showing what your values are and what your policy priorities are. A lot of the stuff that you said I completely agree with, but as has often been the case when you've talked about the environment, you talk about, we're going to hold such and such accountable, but then not really talk about how we're going to do that. I think a lot of I appreciate your advocacy on Wheelabrator, but having a one-dimensional environmental policy is not going to solve these environmental problems. And we know that because it hasn't. That's what we've been doing for the last however many years, and we haven't made progress. I have talked about the steps that we actually need to take, around specific renewable energy goals, around increasing staffing at the Department of Environmental Protection, around having more public control over public utilities so that the Attorney General has some oversight over National Grid and Eversource and other polluters. These are the actual steps that we need to take to hold these types of polluters accountable. We can say that we're going to all we want, but without a real plan to do it, we're just going to keep getting more of the same.
Thank you. Now we come to the final part of the debate, which is the closing statements. Each candidate will be given up to 3 minutes. Jess won the coin toss, so she'll give her closing statement.
Thank you. Well, Joe, you can talk about my transparency and my votes and my opinions on things, but I think I've made that pretty clear to the district for over 8 years being in office. My votes have all been transparent. The city has seen what I've voted on, what I've supported, and what I've done. And unfortunately, I never had the luxury of being an aide. When I was 20 years old, I was already serving the public, and that was my job, and that's what I did. So, in closing, the 16th Suffolk District has a legacy of being led by strong women. I'm in this race because I've worked alongside them and many others over the last 5 terms. I know the issues, I know the communities, and I know that I have the tools necessary to be a strong advocate for my district. At 20 years old, I won my first election. And for 2 terms, I was the only woman on the city council until I was joined by my colleague, Joanne McKenna. In my 3rd term, I was elected city council president by my colleagues, a role that I was honored not once, but twice. Over the past 10 years, I've broken down barriers, and I've worked very hard to earn the respect of my colleagues and my constituents. I've always put 100% into everything that I do, and I believe that through hard work and dedication, anything is possible. The systemic failures of our government to prepare us for events like COVID-19 have been a giant wake-up call to all of us. A first-term representative needs to be honest with their constituents. I know what it's like to be a counselor, to be one of 11, but as a rep, you're only one of 160. And working with your colleagues to get something passed is essential, and I'm the only candidate that has that experience. As a rep, I will work with community leaders to establish a timeline and priorities for the cities of Revere, Chelsea, and Saugus that include short-term needs, mid-range needs, and long-term needs for the 16th Suffolk District. Any candidate who tells you they can snap their fingers and make things happen is clearly out of touch with the way the government works. The keys to success are communication, advocacy, and a unified electorate ready to stand up, show up, and make our collective voices heard. If I'm elected as your state representative, together, we will do just that. I thank you for your support during the last 10 years of my life, and I humbly ask for your support on September 1st as I begin, hopefully, the next chapter of this journey. Thank you.
Joe?
Great. Thank you to everyone who tuned in today, and thank you to the Revere Journal for hosting and to the Councilor for participating. And in closing, I would just like to say that to make real change on a lot of the issues that we talked about tonight, we don't need to just have the right opinions, because I think that on probably 80% of things, maybe even more, the Councilor and I do have pretty similar opinions. But we do need to have the commitment to really dig in and change broken systems. And I think the Councilor does reference it is true that being 1 out of 160, it's very difficult to make change. But there is a movement afoot all around the state for candidates to sign on to something called the State House Transparency Pledge, which commits to changing the way the State House operates. Really, we have a very secretive legislature where a lot of votes happen behind closed doors in committee without having to disclose them. We also have a lot of powerful committee chairs that take campaign contributions from the industries that they're supposed to be regulating. And we don't have term limits on powerful leadership positions, so too much power gets in too few hands. And yeah, one person's not going to change all that, but an army of people running on this platform will. And there's 45 candidates all over the state that have signed on and said, I support the Transparency Pledge. I support bringing more sunlight into our government. I'm the only candidate in my race to have done that. I'm also the only candidate who's committed in public to doing this job full time with 100% of my energy. And I'm not saying that you're not allowed to hold 2 positions. I'm not saying that there's anything unethical about it. I just think it's a difference between the 2 of us, and I also think that people deserve to know how you feel about that question one way or the other. I am proud of the nuts and bolts experience I have working at both the state and city level. I've not held elected office, but I do know how to build coalitions and get things done. I talked about some of the things I worked on at the state level, working for Rep. Ehrlich, and at the city level, working for Mayor Arrigo. And I'm proud of that experience, and I think that experience will serve me and serve the constituents well. The other thing that I've been committed to all year long is being detailed and transparent about how I plan on addressing the issues and challenges that we face. I'm not promising anything, but I'm saying these are the steps that we need to take. Right out of the gate, from the beginning of this campaign back in March, I've gone directly to you to talk about policy, whether it be about response to COVID, about environmental issues, about transportation, so that way you know what my ideas are and where I stand. If you send me to the State House, I can't promise that we're going to agree 100% of the time on every issue. I'm not someone who's going to give typical politician answers to questions and try to dance around them, and I get that that means that sometimes we might disagree. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that we can't respect each other's opinion. I can promise you that I will always be honest with you. I will always be transparent about my intentions of what I'm trying to do. I will always do my homework before proposing a bill or making a vote, and I'll always fight like hell every day to lift up communities like ours in a way that we really desperately need at the State House right now. I'm proud that my campaign is bringing new people and young people into the political process in Revere. People who are excited about our message and ready to fight for needed change. In this strange election year, it's been harder than usual to meet new people, but I've done my best to connect with many of you, and I'm moved by your hopes, by your dreams, and by your aspirations, and by the potential we have to do really, really important work at the state level to fight for these transformative changes that we need so that our post-COVID reality is not similar to our pre-COVID failures. So to help me do just that, I am asking for your vote on September 1st. Thank you.
Well, that concludes the debate, and I just want to thank you for joining us tonight, and thank you to the candidates. Both candidates have given up time from their families and have been campaigning in non-traditional ways due to the pandemic for the last 6 months. We urge all voters to get out and vote on September 1st. Polls open from 7 a.m. and close at 8 p.m. The deadline to register to vote or submit voter registration changes is this Saturday, August 22nd, from 2 to 4 p.m. and 7 to 8 p.m. at City Hall. The deadline to submit a vote-by-mail application or absentee ballot application for a ballot to be mailed is Wednesday, August 26th at 5 p.m. The deadline to submit an application to vote absentee in person is noon on Monday, August 31st. If you have questions about anything I just said, please call the Election Department at 781-286-8200. And candidates, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.